Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, I wanted to talk about an encounter that happened in Idaho back in 1973. In a lot of Bigfoot reports, you'll hear instances where somebody will be walking along, they'll be in the wilderness going down like a hiking trail or whatnot, and they'll hear something in the bushes beside them, paralleling them, or just like walking along, kind of following them. But sometimes, instead of just hearing footsteps, you'll hear like lots of crashing through the brush, like something massive and powerful is just charging through the forest, like a freight train, basically. If you imagine like the T-Rex on Jurassic Park busting through the foliage. Some people report having this happen to them when they come upon a Sasquatch creature. Now, in the story I wanted to talk about this encounter, there's a couple goat hunters, and they're at their camp. They're cooking dinner, they're cooking up some steaks, and they end up hearing vocalizations. They start hearing something screaming in the distance. And then it's followed up by a whistling sound. There's lots of animals out in the wilderness that can make screaming sounds. There's cougars and, things of that nature. Even there's other animals that can make really strange sounds too, like even like a rabbit or a hare. They can make really peculiar noises, but to hear something screaming or roaring might not be that unusual, but to have it being followed up by whistling noises is kind of weird. The whistling sound is a telltale Sasquatch thing. There are a few birds that can make whistling sounds, but if you look at the Sasquatch subject, if you dig deep and look into the reports, you'll find many of them that have these things making whistling sounds. So that is a really good identifier. If you're wondering if something is Sasquatch, if it's making whistling sounds, there's a very good chance that's probably what it is. It seems like Sasquatch has different temperaments sometimes. At one time it can be trying to be quiet, it's sneaking around. Maybe you'll hear like light footsteps or twigs breaking. Maybe it's just in a curious state of being, and it's just investigating the area that you're in, and it's trying to figure out who you are and what you're doing. In other instances, these things seem to be quite violent and scary, and maybe territorial. And that's what it sounds like is going on in the encounter I'm about to go over. It seems like this thing wants these hunters out of the area. So yeah, I guess it kind of depends on what's going on with the Sasquatch, how it's feeling, if it feels threatened or not. Maybe it depends on where exactly you are. If you're in territory that they would consider to be theirs, maybe they would be a little bit more scary and threatening towards you. But let's go over this report, and afterwards I'll talk more about it. In the early 70s, 1973 to be exact, I and my hunting partner had an encounter that occurred near a tributary of the South Fork of the Salmon River drainage near Frank Church Wilderness area, east of McCall and west of Yellow Pine, Idaho. Off a remote road on a late August evening while setting up camp to prepare for a mountain goat hunt, my friend and I had a strange encounter. We had set up camp at the back of my truck, which I had backed off the road into a small clearing, backed by thick brush. Behind the brush was a small meadow and a dark timbered basin surrounded on three sides by steep rocky ridges. The fourth side dropped off into the canyon, leading to a portion of the South Fork of the Salmon River. It had gotten quite dark, and we had a lantern hung in a tree over our cook table and the Coleman stove. We had put on some nice thick steaks that were cooking and smelling up the whole basin. All of a sudden, we heard this blood-curdling scream, followed by a whistle not far from our camp. A responding like scream and whistle came from up high and to our left, and some distance away. We immediately grabbed our rifles, loaded up, and leaned them against the table within quick and easy reach. For a while we heard thrashings in the thick brush that indicated the rather close presence of a large animal. The strangest thing happened then. Although we were shaking in our boots, we both looked at each other and in the same breath said, "These guns are worthless." Strangely, we unloaded and stored the guns in the rack in the truck. We then returned to our meal as we were starving. There were more screams, whistles, and thrashings. We picked up our stove and table and moved so the truck was between us and the noise. All hell broke loose as the animal moved through the brush and took up a position in front of the truck and where it could see us. That was all we could take. We folded up our stove with the steaks still in it and threw everything into the back of the truck and jumped into the cab. We just sat there shaking for a while. After a while, I pointed to my spotlight and said to my friend, "Should I?" He shrugged his shoulders, continued to shake and stare at the floor, saying, "Let's just get the hell out of here." Curiosity was outrunning common sense and fear at that moment, so I pointed the spotlight in the general direction of where the creature was last heard and turned it on. The creature whirled as the light hit it and began boulder hopping up through the steep rock slide on 2 legs at incredible speed and with great agility. I didn't get a good look at its face as it whirled away from the light, but it was definitely standing erect, slightly forward with a slump, and it was very agile on 2 feet, not like a waddling bear standing on its rear feet. It was dark brown to black in color. I've come to grips with this over the years, but my friend will not even speak to me about the incident. While the encounter scared the crap out of me, I now have a desire to again see this creature. Intuitively, I feel like the animal had no real intent to hurt me or my buddy. If it wanted to hurt us, it had many chances. So these guys were so scared that they both agreed that their rifles were useless. That really says something. I mean, I know in the wilderness, things sound usually bigger than they are when you hear a noise. Like at night, a squirrel could sound a lot bigger than a squirrel. But what these guys were experiencing was probably on a whole nother level. Like, yes, they're in like a valley out in the wilderness cooking steaks. Like they describe in the encounter that the smell of their steaks cooking is filling the whole area up. So there is a chance that other animals will come along, like bears and whatnot. The difference between this and a bear, though, is that this thing was making whistling sounds, and, you know, they ended up seeing it. The guy had a spotlight. He ends up pointing the spotlight at it, and he sees this thing bipedal, like it's standing on 2 legs, moving up the slope, up these boulders and rocks. And he gets a half decent look at it. Doesn't get a good look at the face at all, but he is able to see that this thing is, you know, walking on 2 feet. It's massive. In the report, it said the thing is like between 8 and 9 feet tall. Pretty big. If you imagine someone being 7 feet tall, like, have you ever seen somebody who's 7 feet tall? They're pretty tall. 9 feet tall is huge. And then if you think about the proportions of the body in relation to that height, you're looking at something that is absolutely massive, certainly terrifying, and these guys, these hunters, are completely justified in being as frightened as they were. So yeah, to have people who are experienced outdoorsmen like hunters have an experience out in the wilderness that scares them to the degree of leaving, like packing everything up frantically, that is, I don't know, that's very unnerving. Because these are guys who are going into the deepest areas of the wilderness to hunt, you know, the biggest animals that are out there. Like, a lot of times people are out hunting bears. You know, you're tracking bears, you're having encounters with them. That's like the apex predator in North America. And the hunters go after them. But whatever this thing was, this bipedal, humanoid, kind of ape-like creature, this thing had the ability to scare the living hell out of these people. So, we don't know what's out there. People are seeing things, though. People are seeing these things, and there's so many reports out there, and so many new reports coming in every single year. And it's happening all over the place. In the Rocky Mountains, in the Pacific Northwest, all the way across to, you know, the eastern states. How is that even possible? I don't know. These things seem to be everywhere. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about, but I will leave you guys with another story to listen to here. And this happened in the same general area a few years later. I think it was in 1979. It was a guy who works in forestry. He's walking along a creek and he ends up finding tracks that seem to be that of Sasquatch. So whatever area this is in Idaho, there's quite a few reports and people are seeing something there. So thanks for watching this video. Enjoy the rest of the stories. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries. In November of 1979, my wife and I drove out to Little Lake just east of McCall. The lake is very low this time of year, and I went for a walk on the mud flat following the stream that feeds the lake. I wanted to cross the stream, but it was hip deep, and I would have gotten soaked. As I followed the stream, I could start to see large tracks on the other side headed my way. I was amazed to see that this animal had crossed the stream and climbed a steep mud bank without skipping a beat. There was no indication that it even shook itself off after getting wet, like all the other animals do. Now that the tracks were on my side, I followed them, hoping to find one clear print in the mud. Generally, they seemed bipedal, and if I took a really long stride, I'm 5'11", I could walk naturally in the tracks. The tracks dwarfed my size 10 boots, however. They were huge, maybe an inch or two wider and 6 inches or more longer. If somebody told me that Shaquille O'Neal had just taken a walk here, the whole thing might have made sense. Short of that, I don't have any idea of what made those tracks. The sandy mud was just soft enough to round off any details. After following for 100 meters or so, the stream took a sharp turn to the right, but the tracks continued straight, crossing the stream again. Again, the water was hip or waist deep, and again the animal crossed without changing his stride or pace and never shook it off. I find that part, not shaking it off, really strange. I spent my whole life in the woods and work as a wildlife tech for both the US Forest Service and Idaho Fish and Game. I know every animal in this area, and to this day I have no idea what made those tracks. The tracks were generally human, like in that they were narrower at the heel and broader at the toe. I can absolutely rule out a bear, moose, elk, wolf, deer, cougar, etc. They're not even close. If it had crossed the stream, I might have suspected a smaller animal at a dead run. Smaller animals, like coyote, at a run, have all 4 feet hit the ground in roughly the same spot. In snow or mud, this can give the impression of a larger animal. The giveaway, though, is they're in a dead straight line. Also, if it had been something smaller, the track would have changed as it entered and left the water. The tracks I saw never once varied in any way. Just looked like a really large man that didn't mind getting soaked and could scramble up a muddy bank without using his hands or changing pace in any way. I stared at those tracks coming out of the water and up the bank for some time. Didn't seem possible for anything to do that without breaking stride. Also, the depth of the tracks were much deeper than mine. I can't remember the depth, but I do remember thinking that whatever it is, it must be 2 or 3 times my size.